tricky question. So I think it's gonna be a while for VR and AR, VR, all these kind of technologies to really penetrate the media entertainment space. I think most of the success that it's going to have is going to be around gaming, interactive gaming. We are going to see a lot of experiments here and there, but I don't think it's going to become mainstream simply because it's very difficult to use these technologies in storytelling, in mainstream storytelling every day, because a big part of storytelling, if it's talking like series, drama, scripted programming, a big part of the storytelling is around telling the story, and also the director's role is how to deliver that story to the audience from a specific perspective. Now, once you go to AR and VR, and once you give the audience the control to kind of move around within that space, you're no longer showing them something specific. You're giving them the freedom and control to kind of look at things from different perspectives. And that is very, very difficult to kind of achieve. Like, imagine watching a movie, but able to kind of look at whatever actor you want. It's experimental, you can do things like that, but you're automatically taking away a lot of the control that the director has, or the DOP has when it comes to, when I'm telling a story, I want to emphasize a specific scene, I want to show you something specific. If you're not looking at it, you're looking at something else, then it kind of defeats the whole purpose. So I think there's a lot of things that are going to kind of, challenges that are going to arise from these kind of technologies when it comes to storytelling. I think, but mostly it's going to kind of really elevate the whole gaming industry to a large extent. I think we're a good 5 to 10 years away from seeing it as a mainstream technology used in movies and series and these kind of productions.
What do you think, and when do you think عندنا interactive episodes أو series أو movies زي Bandersnatch أو حاجة similar in Black Mirror's Bandersnatch?
I think that's not difficult. I think we're probably going to start seeing things like that very soon. It's not that difficult as a format. It's not new. It's something that's been around for a very long time, even from the days of like interactive books. I think now with interactive media, like platforms and technology, it allows us to kind of really implement these much easier. So it is something I think we're going to start seeing very soon. Whether it's going to kind of take over and that becomes the norm, I don't think so. I think it's still going to be like some sort of a niche within, it's going to be a new genre. Like, just like you have horror, you have thriller, you can have interactive storytelling. So it's something that it is going to start happening, but I don't think it's going to take over the whole production space.
Where do you want to go with what's your future plans?
I think our focus is really about storytelling, being able to kind of deliver the stories that the audience are looking for but are not able to see. If we look at the whole landscape today, like between television, YouTube, Facebook, all the different kind of content that people are consuming today, there's been a lot happening on the non-scripted front. So like the shows, like the YouTube shows and things like that. These are like programs. So there's a lot of creativity coming out of YouTube creators and a lot of content coming out of them. And I think that's catering well to the audience. But when it comes to scripted dramas, like whether it's a movie, whether it's a series, and these kind of things, I think very little has been done. And I think simply because first of all, it's a very expensive undertaking. So to kind of produce that kind of content requires a lot of investment. And the ones that are normally usually making these investments are the TV channels. And they want to play it safe. They want to cater to the masses. They want to be able to secure their advertising revenue, which is mostly skewed towards older generations that have disposable income. But when looking at your younger audience, your Gen Zs, your Gen Ys and millennials, very, very little is being done to cater to them. And this is where we see ourselves really taking the lead, trying to create stories that appeal to that younger audience, stories about that younger audience that is going to appeal to them, but also is going to appeal to a much broader audience. And I think we're in a position where we can take that risk. I don't see it as a risk. I think the industry as a whole or at large might consider this to be risky. For us, I think it's actually a very good investment because that is today that is the largest segment of the audience. Like in the Middle East, 50% of the audience is actually below the age of 30. So really catering for them is an actual a good investment for the future because that is going to be your audience for the future. So we want to really focus on that segment and be able to cater for them with really innovative kind of storytelling, different types of things that you're not used to seeing in television. What we used to see in television is purely melodrama and comedy. But there's a lot of other themes that have never been explored, where we don't see supernatural stuff, we don't see horror, we don't see procedural dramas. So there's a lot of different areas that we can explore that the audience will want to see, and I think this is where we want to focus most of our efforts.
How do you face the challenge of catering to different countries in the Middle East, different tongues?
It is challenging. So if you really look at the whole Middle East, it's really, you've got subcultures within it. So you've got the Gulf as a whole is very similar to each other, but even within the Gulf, Saudi is very different than Kuwait, different than UAE. The Levant, same thing. So you've got whether it's Lebanon, Syria, Jordan, Palestine, also a lot very similar, but they have their own differences within. So I think initially we're creating for each of these subcultures content. So we're creating Gulf content for the Gulf market. We're creating Egyptian for the Egyptian market. We're not really focusing much on North Africa. It's not an area that we're focusing on. Most of our efforts are focused on Egypt and the Gulf. So we are creating content for both. So as I said, like if you look at our slate of content, we've been doing something Egyptian and something Saudi. Egyptian and Saudi. So we're working across both these different audience segments. Really, for us, the ultimate goal is to kind of really create content that crosses over. So how do we create Egyptian content that everybody in the Middle East is going to watch? It's easier with Egyptian because there's a whole heritage of Egyptian content. Everybody in the Middle East grew up watching Egyptian content, whether it's movies or series. But the challenge is the other way around. How do I create Saudi content that can really be watched in other markets? And this is really the challenge. This is the difficult thing to do. Like a small example with Dune, which is the series that we've released in February. It's an action thriller, 10 episodes long. Surprisingly, 15% of the audience that is watching it, it's purely Saudi. 15% of the users that are watching it on the platform are coming from Egypt. So that to us was quite a surprise, and we're quite happy with it. It's refreshing to kind of know that the content we're creating is actually crossing over. But I'd like us to see even more and more of that happening. I'll be lying to you if I tell you I have the answer. How do we create content that travels? I think the simplest answer to that is create good content. So good content travels, I think the dialect itself it can be challenging, but we can really try to. If you're designing it from the beginning with the objective for it to travel, then you need to be wary of these kind of things. Make sure that the language in the script that's being used is something that can be widely understood. Or you could go as far as, okay, let's make it travel global. Then language isn't really the issue here. We could subtitle content, okay? And so View is actually available in 18 different markets. So we're available in Southeast Asia, Philippines, Malaysia, Thailand, Indonesia, India, South Africa. And a lot of the content that we produce across different markets is intended to travel. So our content is being viewed in other markets, and content that's being produced in Malaysia and Indonesia is being available on the View platform for the Middle East viewers to watch. And we're experimenting with a lot of different things. We're trying dubbing, so we're trying to dub content, we're trying to subtitle content. So I think the challenge is not only limited to the Middle East and Egypt and the Gulf, it's actually more of a global. How do we make content that is appealing to a global audience, people that don't even speak Arabic? And really the answer is good content is going to travel. If you create really, really good stories, really compelling stories, everybody's going to want to watch it. And I think there's proven success stories, not from our platform, but from other players out there, and like foreign content that's been traveling the world and people have been watching it all over, whether it's Spanish, whether it's Turkish, whether it's that's a very good example. Exactly. So I think people look at them as more of a genre now. So Turkish is Turkish, you know. But why did people get hooked into Turkish the first time around? They watched something like Noor, and it was a really, really good production, really, really good story, and people, okay, so the first barrier was broken. Well, am I willing to watch something that's Turkish? And once you break that barrier, then people are going to be willing to explore more of that content. But it's really getting that initial misconception of, I'm not going to enjoy that content. But if you do enjoy it, then it's a lot easier from that point onwards.
When do you think will the Middle East us will be able to be competitive doing production for مثلا fantasy or sci-fi?
I think it's not, the question isn't about the production. I think we have pretty good skill sets across a lot of different disciplines within the production industry. I think our challenge is the culture. I think when you look at, and we explored this so many different times, when we're looking at themes like vampires, okay? Vampires are not something that we as a culture grew up with. Okay, so unlike in the States or other markets, or Europe, or in other countries where you grow up as a kid, you know what a vampire is, you know what a zombie is, you have superheroes, you read comic books as a child. For us to really be able to explore these kind of themes, we need to look within ourselves, within our culture. What are the things that are deep-rooted within our culture that we can actually use to kind of tell these stories? So just trying to replicate what's done in other cultures and think that it's going to work, I think is going to fail miserably. I think what we have to do is look within our culture. What are the things that we could take and build stories around? Like, for example, things that really work with us well is jinn. Why? Because it's deep-rooted in our culture, deep-rooted in Islam, deep-rooted in we all know that, and it's believable. We believe in their existence. So stories around that is something that really works. Now, that's just scratching the surface. There's so many different themes, and there's so many different cultural stories that we can dig deep into our culture and really start exploiting and driving stories around. And that's where I think once we start doing that, we can export that culture to other markets. I think Arabs are willing to watch a vampire movie, but under a foreign context. But once you take that and you say, okay, it's a vampire in Egypt, it starts becoming unbelievable. So how do you create a story that is believable? Unless you can do something that's like satirical. You want to do something comedy. Yeah, you can do that. But if you want to do something that's really, really believable, it has to be in a way deep-rooted into your culture, something that your audience relates to. And once they relate to it, then it becomes believable, it becomes better, and then it can actually even travel, and then you can export your culture, because that's one of the things that people want to know. People want to know what other cultures and what's different about people in other places in the world. And when you do that, you actually bridge that gap.
Will we have the capabilities, or will the graphics teams or animation teams be able to execute such stories?
I think we have the skill set, okay? Our biggest challenge is not, do we have the people that can execute? I know we have the people. And I know of specific people across different disciplines within the industry that can make it work. The real challenge we have is the economics, okay? Economics. So in Hollywood, they could spend hundreds of millions of dollars on a production. So they can really afford to put so much money behind the project because they see that, okay, I'm going to be able to monetize that. Okay, so if I'm going to spend $100 million on a project, if I'm going to make $200 million, then it's a good investment. For us, the industry is the challenge. Today, can we, if you give me $100 million, I can make sure that I can create the best entrepreneurial story ever. Okay, best quality, can compete on a global level. But how are you going to make that money back? So, do you have the channels and the ecosystem and the value chain that could give you back $100 million worth of revenue to cover that expense? Not really. That's where our challenge is today. So it's how much are we willing to invest in the production value and how much can you make back? So if you look at in the West or in the US or in US as an example, how much it costs to produce a single episode. Like in the Middle East, it costs anywhere between $50,000 to $100,000 to produce an episode. Over there, it could be 10 times that. So our limitation is in how much we're willing to invest in it, and that's where the limitation in quality really is tied down. So if you want to do something that's really fantastical, it needs a lot of post-production work, it needs a lot of graphics, and you know, special effects. And we can do that, but you need to pay. You need to kind of make that investment. And the challenge is, can you recoup that investment? But I think slightly, I think it's about pushing the envelope bit by bit until we get to that point. Jumping, like going from 50,000 per episode to 500,000 per episode is a challenge. Unless we figure out ways, how do we monetize globally? How can I sell this content in China? How do I sell it in the States? How do I sell it?
Yeah.
Once you start selling it all over the world, then you can start making.
That's what I was gonna say. I was gonna say, يعني what if you compete? أصل هنا you can produce with less money طبعا عن دبي وأمريكا. But at the same time, if you compete بقى في الماركت بتاعهم, you can make the money basically they make. بس أنا بقى, is that possible يعني قصدي? I'm just thinking.
But that's where the economics of it all fit. Today, in order to sell a product in the States, it has to be at the same production quality and the same level of the people there are expecting. So if it costs $500,000 an episode there, you need to make an investment of $500,000 to take it to that level.
Famous.
So you can sell it there, okay?
Yeah.
But if you're making that investment and expecting to make that money out of the Middle East alone, it's not going to happen. So you have to think with global mindset. How can I cover my expenses from all over the world? Which is really, it's a very hard nut to crack. Nobody really, like, I think this is, I wouldn't say theoretical. We all know, the industry knows that this is how you do it, but nobody's actually been able to do it right yet.
That's why I think Netflix is the only one who can, actually, they have the funding to do.
They have the funding and they have a good audience. Today, when someone like Netflix invests in a series, they're not investing for the Middle East. If they're going to do something Arabic, they want everybody around the world to watch it. So they have that scale. So they have 100 million subscribers all over the world, if not more, that is going to watch it. So local players, is a lot more challenging for them to be able to achieve that.